Welcome back to day 2 of our river scene painting. We will continue painting our river scene with the wet on dry technique. Your first layer of color should be applied throughout the entire painting. Today, we will be focusing on building up the next 2 value layers in our trees on the right and the patch of grass on the left. As we paint, we want to make sure we are capturing the value areas on the forms, being highlights, core shadows, cast shadows, and reflective light. Before you begin painting, always analyze your reference photo or scene. Ask yourself, what colors am I seeing? Do they show a color bias? Are they tints, tones, or shades? In watercolor painting, you always build up your values from light to dark and paint the areas in the distance first and those in the foreground last. So let's begin our analysis stage by analyzing the colors in the tree in the distance. Because the tree is furthest away from us, its value will be lighter and the color intensity will be duller. Therefore, we will be making tints. I am also noticing that the green has a cool color bias, so is leading to more of a blue-green tertiary color. Therefore, when I begin mixing my colors, I know I want to add in more blue to create this tertiary color, and then more water to dilute the pigment of this color to make it into a tint. Begin mixing your tertiary blue-green by combining light yellow, a touch of cyan blue, and a touch of ultramarine blue. Keep mixing these 3 colors together until you match the hue in the reference photo. To match the value, add water into your mixed hue until you have the proper light tint. Color test your mixed hue by painting it on your scrap paper, which should be taped above your river scene painting on your crescent board. Continue adding in water until the value of this hue matches the value that you see in the trees. Once the hue is accurate, begin painting in this color with the corner of your rectangular brush. Vary the angle and pressure of each mark to create various types of marks. Be careful not to make your marks too similar, as this will make your tree look less organic. So as you paint, analyze your reference photo, making sure you are leaving space for the highlight and any later values that you've previously painted. Remember, with every layer of a darker hue you place down on your watercolor painting, it shouldn't be covering over every single thing you've previously painted, or else you won't get that gradation of value that really helps make objects look more three-dimensional. To help you make marks that are random and not monotonous, think about making little mark families. For example, press the brush down more firmly to make a larger mark that could be considered a dad. Then make a medium-sized mark with like a more lighter pressure for the mom. And then make 3 consecutive smaller marks to represent the children. If you follow this large, medium, and 3 slightly smaller size approach when making marks, this will help make each mark intentionally varied, resulting in more organic, tree-like appearance. And if you found, like me, where that first little bit of second color that I put down is already dry, feel free to go back in and add some slightly smaller little marks in there to vary it a little bit more to not make it look so flat, because we want this to look nice and three-dimensional. So I'm adding in my little tiny children marks in there, and I recommend you do the same only if the watercolor in that section is dry. Now, using the same tint we did in those trees, we have to show the reflection of that tint on the water by painting them in with your small rectangular brush on horizontal strokes. Do not angle your brush or paint your marks on a diagonal. Each color in the reflection must be painted in on a horizontal axis to show how the surface of the water is flat. Vary the length of each horizontal line to create the illusion of ripples in the water. And then we can move on to mixing our second color. For this next color, we're going to be painting in the tree on the furthest side of our composition. As we analyze this color, you'll notice how this tree is a little more intense than the trees we just painted, and that's because it is closer to us in the foreground. This tree is also leaning more towards a yellow-green tertiary color, so we will want to be mixing a little more yellow than blue than we did for our previous trees. To mix this next hue, we will combine light yellow, a touch of cyan blue, and then a touch of Prussian blue. We want to use Prussian blue and not ultramarine this time because Prussian is a more intense blue and will help brighten the intensity of this hue. If we used ultramarine again, then it would dilute the intensity of this green, which is the opposite of what we want. And once again, always test the value and intensity of each hue on your practice paper before applying it onto your final watercolor painting. Approach painting this tree the same way we did for the others behind it. Use the corner of your small rectangular brush and then create your, mark families. Vary the pressure of your brush to create the dad by pressing a little bit harder to make a larger mark. Press a little bit lighter to make the mom mark, and then press really light, like 3 little different light touches to create your little children marks, to create your little mark family. In addition to changing the pressure of your marks, also make sure you're changing the angle of them, because this will help create a wider variation of marks to make sure that your tree is looking more natural. And most importantly, pay attention to your value placements. Avoid putting this darker pigment over top of your highlights and the lightest greens you've previously painted within this section. Also paint in a small patch of light green grass by painting in lines with the side of your rectangular brush. Paint these lines in as short little hatching strokes, making sure they're being put in the same direction that they were painted within the painting. And then give yourself a couple little horizontal marks within the water to show the reflection of this tree, making sure that each mark that you've painted in is completely horizontal. We will continue using this same intense yellow-green in the patch of grass on the left of our river scene painting. When painting in this grass, you must pay attention to the length and the direction the grass is growing in. Begin by painting the grass that is furthest away from you, so that's going to be at the top of this little ridge. Notice how the grass tilts more to the right as it comes closer to the river. Make sure your own marks reflect this angular shift. Use the side of your brush to paint nice crisp lines, and make sure you have enough hue mixed so that it's fluid, as this will help you make cleaner, smoother looking lines. And as you paint in this yellow-green, pay attention to your reference photo. If you consistently analyze your reference photo, it will help you make sure that you're only putting the current color in the correct spots. Notice how I left a patch of grass blank to reflect this open area to the right of the tree. I am also making sure I'm painting my grass in the overlapping sections apparent in the reference photo. Every mark that I paint is intentional and not rushed. It is thought out before I place it on the paper, because I've analyzed what was in front of me before I finally painted. For example, I see more of this light yellow green that I previously painted below this tree, so that's why I'm leaving more gaps between my green marks than the space to the right. For our next layer of color, we will revisit the trees we initially painted. We will combine the same 3 colors, but will not be adding more water. We want to create a tone, a color that is not intense, but diluted in intensity so the trees still sit further into the distance. To mix this tone, combine light yellow, a touch of cyan blue, and then a touch of ultramarine blue. This is the same combination of colors we previously mixed, but this time do not dilute it to where you're creating a tint by adding more water. We want this color to be more of a tone, a diluted hue that sits back into the distance. And when I say diluted, I mean we're diluting it with pigment, not with water. The light yellow is a very intense color, so we're diluting that intensity by adding in the ultramarine blue again to make it look a little bit duller. This darker tone only covers a small area in these trees. You could say they create the core shadows of the trees, the area that is furthest from the light source that receives little to no light. This darker value also helps separate each tree from the next, making it a very important component in helping our trees look more 3-dimensional. So once again, make your marks as that mark family, changing the pressure and angle of your brush for each stroke. As I was painting this in, I realized that the value of this tone was not dark enough still, and so what I'm doing is I'm remixing this tone again by adding in more yellow, light yellow, more cyan blue, and more ultramarine blue, making sure that I'm not diluting that pigment by adding in water, and I'm taking that more concentrated pigment and I'm painting it back in as a wet on dry to darken the value of these trees. And you'll notice that this next value matches the value in my reference photo a lot more, which is making these trees look even more 3-dimensional. For those of you that like to have an example of what it should look like every step of the way, I'm just going to show what I did and where I painted this particular tone for the rest of this section. But if you just want to look at the reference photo, you can fast forward through this step until the next thing that we're going to paint, and that is going to be the bluish green grass that we're seeing on the right hand side of our composition. Whenever you are painting the grass on the right, use the same hue we've just been painting for these back trees, but pay attention to the length and direction of the grass. Notice that there are short horizontal marks at various heights, as well as darker blue-green strokes throughout this section that are going vertical. So you're going to have some shorter ones at the very tippy top and some longer ones on the very bottom. It is also imperative that you paint this bluish green hue in the reflection of the water. Keep your strokes horizontal, but vary the length. The placement of these marks will mirror the placement that you have it in with the object. So like, on the opposite part of the tree as well as the opposite part of the grass. As I finished painting in these horizontal strokes of the bluish green reflection on the water, I was noticing that I was missing kind of this deeper blue in the water itself. So anytime that you're noticing you're missing a color, stop, remix it, and then put it in. So what I'm going to do here in a second is I'm going to mix a combination of cyan blue and ultramarine blue together. I'm going to water it down to make a tint, and so you can see me doing that right now. And then I'm painting that in as a wet on dry in the other portions of my water, and that's just adding in that brighter blue that you're seeing in that section there in the reference photo. And I just felt like that helped kind of solidify the water a little bit more and make it look a little bit darker in value. And once you've done that, you're done for the day. So take a picture of your completed work and submit it into Schoology.